Lecture 2, Self-Consciousness.
I begin this second lecture with a line from that great classic, The Night of the Living Dead, which I discussed in the first lecture. This is what was said in that movie, and it's a good way to begin the second lecture. If you kill the brain, you kill the ghoul, close quote. What is asserted here is that without a functioning brain, the zombies would be finished. However, with their functioning brains, revived from death by radiation, they remain the living dead, which is to say, active, sensing, hungry beasts, able to find and, alas, devour human flesh, but in the manner of some gruesome robot. If zombies are really like their portrayals, I can imagine one of them responding to the name George, and even running toward the zombie hotel when summoned by that name. What I cannot imagine is his knowing himself to be George, for a zombie presumably doesn't know anything. To know something is presumably to be conscious of. And if the previous lecture reached a correct position on this matter, zombies aren't conscious. And as they are not conscious, they certainly are not self-conscious. Well, what about us? Are we conscious? And, except when sleeping, are we always conscious? And just what is that self, absent which one cannot be self-conscious? And just what is the relationship between consciousness and knowledge? These are questions I'll address in this second lecture. Let me take the last question first, just to show that reasonable assumptions do not always pass philosophical muster. The claim, quote, "I am conscious of a rabbit in the garden," close quote, is clearly different from the claim, quote, "I know there is a rabbit in the garden," close quote, for one might well be conscious of what is actually a figment of the imagination. To know there is a rabbit in the garden requires, among other considerations, that indeed there is a rabbit in the garden. But to be conscious of a rabbit in the garden may be no more than to suffer from a kind of hallucination. Of course, one might also be utterly confused as to what one knows is in the garden. But there's a difference between being mistaken about what is out there and being mistaken in assuming that there is anything out there. Put more directly, there's a difference between a mistake and an hallucination. There is also a difference between being conscious of and being conscious. The former is always subject to error. The latter, it seems, is quite different in this regard. Being conscious or aware is to be the possible subject of an experience, whether at any time there is, in fact, the specific experience of anything. One might think of this as a system being on the air, though not yet tuned to any clear station or channel. The subject of possible experience is what in ordinary terms is often referred to as the self, as in myself. And it is to the concept of self that I now turn. In the older phenomenological literature, there is the common assumption that consciousness invariably includes a self. As Edmund Husserl expressed it, the self as such appears unfailingly with consciousness, in Husserl's German phrase, für sich selbst erscheinend. Here the German phrase captures the notion of consciousness as the simultaneous arrival or appearance of the self. Sartre makes the same point when he takes self-consciousness to be the very mode of experience and not merely a property of it. Indeed, it is, he says, the only mode of existence for there to be a consciousness of anything at all. Now, in the more current idiom, the same notion is conveyed by the idea of what it is like to be the subject of experiences. Common though this way of phrasing the matter is, I'm wary of it, for it seems to require some sort of conceptual bridge to take us from what it is like to have thoughts, desires, feelings, etc., across the bridge to ourselves as thinking, desiring, and feeling beings. I am going to try here to avoid the what it is like to be locutions, even at the risk of philosophical naivete. Instead, I will say straight away that every conscious moment is someone's, but that every conscious moment does not invariably focus on that fact. If philosophical terms are useful in dealing with matters of this sort, I would say that there is a difference between what is called unreflective and reflective consciousness. It would be odd, after concluding the morning shower, for a person to maintain a disciplined conversation with herself of the sort, I am now looking in the mirror, I am now drying my right cheek, I am now looking for the talc. Rather, all sorts of semi-automatic initiatives are taken without any reflective self-consciousness at all on the part of the actor. For there to be knowledge, motives, desires, beliefs, there must be consciousness. But these features of mental life are often in operation without the actor reflecting on each or all of them, or perhaps even any of them. Reflective consciousness is something else again. Here we recognize not only that conscious experience invariably includes self-consciousness, as what Sartre called the mode of its very existence, but the focus is on self as the subject or the source. But what or who is this self? We might begin our inquiry by considering an old sailing vessel in serious need of repair. The wooden planks are rotten, the mast is wormy, and the sails in shreds. Let's call the ship Old Faithful. Buying it at a cheap price, we have funds remaining to restore it to its pristine condition. We hire craftsmen and give them an ample enough budget to buy new wood and new sailing cloth. They proceed to remove each plank and replace it with new boards, now sanded and covered with a high-quality marine shellac. In time, we see Old Faithful as it might have appeared to its original crew. But is this Old Faithful? Should we not call it Son of Old Faithful, or Old Faithful 2? Now suppose we take the old rotten planks and have the workmen assemble these to form another vessel, now made only of the original materials. In light of the difference in the composition of the two vessels, one would be hard-pressed to decide which should be regarded as Old Faithful. One of the ships, fully repaired, shares none of the history of the original vessel. The other has all the original material, but is scarcely seaworthy. It's scarcely a ship at all, or it cannot function as a ship. What if an observer, aware of all this, insists that neither vessel is Old Faithful, for Old Faithful disappeared when all of its constituents were removed? For something to be itself, it must have continuity over time. Note, however, that none of the constituents of our own bodies remains constant over time, and in light of that fact, it might be argued that there